Hi, I'm Carrie.
And I'm Molly.
And you're listening to the
Two Sisters on Adventures podcast.
Today we're going to start our series where we're going to talk about the Wonderland Trail. This was a really exciting trail for us to get permits to do because we have been applying to hike this trail since 2021, you guys. So every year we would put in permits for certain trails. Molly would put in an application to the lottery. Rachel would put an application to the lottery. I would put an application into the lottery. We did that for Copper Ridge for a couple years and got that one. And we did that for, Sahali, and we got that one. But every year we throw our names into the Rainier lottery. And every year, this is actually going to sound crazy. People are going to be shocked to hear this, but every single year I've gotten a permit. Every single year I've won, quote unquote, the lottery. But the interesting thing about the Wonderland Trail is just because you, quote unquote, win the lottery does not actually mean that you'll be able to get a workable itinerary for a permit. So when you win the lottery, quote unquote, for the Wonderland Trail.
And this is on recreation.gov, as many national park trips, backcountry permits are.
So when you win the lottery, you're given a window in which you can start selecting your permits. And I think the people, your campsites. And you have to string together your campsites to be able to make it all the way around the volcano. And you can't go more than a certain number of miles a day to be able to get that permit to hike the whole thing. You have to be able to select campsites around the entire volcano, obviously. So I think the first day that you're able to log in, if you get that time slot, is like the 16th of March, something like that. It's like it's mid-March. And every year when I would win, the first year I got like the last day before it opens to the public. So it was like April 20th or something. And literally everything was gone. But it was funny because I won the lottery and I was so sure I was going to get a permit because of that I had done all this investigation. I'd spent the winter reading blogs and plotting out the perfect spots for us. I just felt so confident we would get it. And so then when we logged in and there was like almost nothing available, it was just devastating. So then it was kind of like the next year I won an earlier access slot again, and it was maybe like April 12th. And so I was like, okay, maybe this time it'll work. But we couldn't string anything together again. And then did I win one again last year? I'm pretty sure I did. And it was slightly earlier, but I was still not able to string everything together. And so it's kind of funny because I think that this year I had mentioned to someone, oh yeah, I won the lottery and I got an access time, and they're like, oh, that's so exciting, you're going to be able to do the Wonderland Trail. And I was kind of like, well, just because I got an access time does not at all mean that I'm going to do the Wonderland Trail. It just means I got the access time, so I've paid $20 and now I can just look at it and not get it like I've done for the past 3 years. But when the day came, so I feel like I hadn't really done any research about this in years because I feel like I just had gotten kind of bummed and discouraged. And a lot of people say you can get a walk-up permit easily. I don't know, but I also just never really wanted to commit to going there and not knowing if I would be able to hike the trail or not. So when the day actually came, I was working at the time that my time slot came open, but Molly was not at work yet, I believe, or she had the day off. So I had her log in for me and I said, sure, just look at what sites are available. And she actually was able to make it work.
And some background on the Wonderland Trail, I think that like the quoted distance is 93 miles. It goes all the way around Mount Rainier. So every single campsite that you're in is in the boundaries of Mount Rainier National Park. So once again, having to basically obtain pretty competitive campsites, and then the ability to then string those all together to make it around the mountain can be quite challenging just because of the popularity of the trail. And so it was ironic when, back the first year we thought we were going to hike the Wonderland Trail, we knew some campsites that are like more desirable because of how scenic they are, and then there are certain ones that you just have to have in order to make your itinerary work, especially the ones that are on the east side of the mountain, which would be either Indian Bar or Summerland. So it's just like really the issues that we had year after year would just be that one of those campsites weren't available, or basically we didn't want to push like more than 18 or 20 miles in a day. And the recreation.gov actually kind of constrains you. Like, I think technically they're not supposed to allow you to have a distance that's longer than, I thought it was 16 and a half miles, but it must be more like 18 miles to put your itinerary together. So, so there was like some discouragement, and really we hoped every year that we could get the permits to do the Wonderland Trail enough to try. And every year, every subsequent year, we kind of felt a little less optimistic about the ability to get those permits. So I did log in, and you can kind of keep track of what campsites are available in advance just to see like if you could put something together. So say like 2 years ago, Carrie won an access day in mid-April, and I went on at the very beginning, and everything is available to you. And then like every week I could see how the permits were getting snapped up. And then by the time we got that permit or the access day, it was just like, can't make it work. So then, this spring when I logged on, I looked for things that were in July and August, and there was nothing. And in reality, we actually had done a 1 night, 2-day trip on the east side, and we had stayed at Summerland last year because we figured we'd never be able to actually do the Wonderland Trail. So when I saw that there was a permit that was just available for 1 night at that one campsite on recreation.gov, we said, like, let's do it, because we actually were putting together a backup plan because of a fire that had changed up our goal the previous year. So we had been on the Wonderland Trail, just, like 15 miles of it, and seen how beautiful it was. So it's ironic because we learned when we stayed at Summerland last year that there are actually a lot of people who just will spend like 1 night in the backcountry of Mount Rainier, and they'll take a really highly desirable campsite like Indian Bar or Summerland, and I can't blame them because those are very scenic places to camp. And if I only had 1 night in the Mount Rainier backcountry, I would definitely go to one of those places. However, it's ironic because when you're trying to put your itinerary together, those places are super necessary to actually be able to make your trip work. And they're always the ones that are gone. So when I logged in, I was like, I don't really feel like, there's this chance of it working out. And in July and August, I briefly looked at it, but we decided we didn't even really want to go in that time of year because we went last year in August and it was so hot. We had a miserable time. I think the high temperature was in the 90s, and we were thinking, okay, we're going to be over a mile high. That's where we're camping, so it'll be cooler because that's what we were used to, especially in Oregon. It seemed like as soon as you started to get up high, it would start to become cooler. That's how altitude works. But no, we had the hottest time. It was just miserable. We all had heat rash, and we were just like, I don't think we could possibly go around Mount Rainier if we hit the trail during one of those really hot weeks that have happened in the recent past in July and August in the PNW. So we kind of wanted to do a fall hike of Mount Rainier. So I scrolled over to September and October, and early September there was nothing I could put together. But all of a sudden, end of September, things started to line up. And I used Carrie's list of like best possible campsites, which she had created years ago when we really thought that we would be able to do the Wonderland Trail. And so I was like, wow, like I saw that Carrie had written down like Golden Lakes was a good campsite and also Clapatchie Park. And here, like those 2 campsites were available if we started from Mowich Lake. And then all of a sudden, I had, once again, my resources with me, and I was looking at campsites that were desirable and appropriate distances, and then they were all just matching it up on the website. And here I had put together an itinerary that was 8 days and 7 nights, which was actually perfect for us. In the past, we'd always thought we would try to go faster, and usually that was just because there were no campsites available, so we were going to try to stretch and push. But I really liked this itinerary. Like, it had a good balance of some kind of medium hiking days, like 10 to 12 miles. There was a balance where there were a couple days that were 15 to 18 miles, just 2 days. And then 1 day or 2 days that were actually 8 to 9 miles. So I was thinking after we did the Tahoe Rim Trail and we had to do almost 20-mile days every single day, that really wore on us after a while. And I think if we had to do it, right, we could. That's what we did in the Tahoe Rim Trail. We soldiered on. But we wanted this trip to be maybe a little bit more fun and not so much about soldiering on. So I really couldn't believe it. There was the possibility to do this trail. One of the, caution factors was that it was the end of the fall kind of in the Pacific Northwest. So we really didn't know if it would work out because of the possibility of big systems causing a lot of rain and snow. But I texted Carrie and I was like, dude, should I buy this permit? We can do it.
So we were obviously so excited to get the permits. Honestly, we didn't really tell anyone about it, though. It was kind of funny because it was like we had these permits to hike the Wonderland Trail. And at first I was like, oh, do I even want to tell Rachel? Because I'd feel so bad if she took time off work and then all of a sudden a snowstorm moved in and now we can't do this 7-day, 8-day, 7-night backpacking trip that she's taken time off work to do. And then it turned out we talked to our friend and she said she was going to be moving back home to Texas and kind of probably moving back around the beginning of October. And we were like, have you ever considered taking off a week plus 1 day to hike around a mountain with your best hiking pals? And so it was awesome because then Rachel could come with us too. We'd made it 3 people intentionally because I always felt like if we did the Wonderland Trail, it had to be us and Rachel because we were from the beginning all applying together, and we love doing a backpacking trip with her every year. It's just a fun way to reconnect with friends. But so we were very excited to have the permit, but we were also kind of very cautious and just saying like, if we get to go, if it works out, really not committing. And so the exciting thing about the Wonderland Trail is you can have resupplies on it. So much like,
oh, this is amazing.
Much like how on the John Muir Trail, you don't bring all of your food with you because, on that trail, it just is not realistic. You have to bring we did it in 14 days and we wouldn't have been able to bring that much food with us. But much like how the John Muir Trail has points where you can resupply at, people often resupply on the Wonderland Trail because some people take 10 days to do it. Some people take 14 days to do it. It's 93 miles, so that's not a short trail at all. And there are 3 spots where you can resupply. You can resupply at the White River Campground. You can resupply at the Longmire Ranger Station, or you can resupply at Mowich Lake, which is where we ended up starting. So most people usually do 2 resupplies along the way because you often start at one of those 3 points and then have your 2 resupplies as you go along. So we were really excited about that from the very beginning. Especially if you guys think about our trip on the Tahoe Rim Trail last year, people can resupply on that trip, but because we planned to do it 1 minute before we did it, we just were carrying almost all of our food with us, except we resupplied some lunch and snack items when we were in, Tahoe City. So if you think back to our last fall adventure, which you can listen to, our Tahoe Rim Trail series, we had heavy packs for that fall trip because we had all these days worth of food. We each were carrying bear cans because those are required in Lake Tahoe, on the Tahoe Rim Trail, I believe, or at least they were last year. I think that they finally instated them last year. And so we had bear cans and we had to carry all these extra pounds of water because there was no running water long sections of the trail. And I had, an injury that kind of caused us to get off trail, along with the fact that we just did not have a long enough time frame. But we just wanted this to be a fun girls trip. Molly and I were always like, girls trip. So we just decided that we were going to resupply 2 times, which was the max number of times we could resupply, even though it was only 8 days.
And so this was so exciting for us once again. We actually completed 2 longer trails. And so long is a relative term based on your hiking experience, right? Some people who are just getting into backpacking might feel like a 3 or 4 day trip is long because it is until you do that consistently. So we actually had the ability to do a whole week, 7 days in the Wind River Range in Wyoming, which we'll talk about in a subsequent podcast series. And then we're going to get to do the Wonderland Trail as well at 8 days. So 2 longer distance week plus long trips. And when we went to the Wind River Range, we had no resupplies. So we started with all of our food in our bags, and that's heavy. Like, I'm thinking back to our time on the Tahoe Rim Trail, and we've carried mountaineering packs in this last year, and I'm pretty sure our packs on the Tahoe Rim Trail were heavier than a mountaineering pack. And so that's where we didn't weigh them, but I wouldn't be surprised if they were over 50 pounds. Like, it was heavy. So we just felt this immense sense of joy to be able to resupply every 2 to 3 days, because that cuts your weight down significantly.
And not only that, I was just going to say on the Tahoe Rim Trail, when we were carrying our 50-pound packs, we were doing 20-mile days. So I just think that this whole time it's been nice because we were able to focus on the Wonderland Trail as being a fun trail, because we'd be like, we're going to keep it light. We're not trying to go fast. Like, this trail is just about hanging out with our friend Rachel, enjoying the trail that we finally get the chance to do that I was kind of assuming we would just never do. And then also bringing whatever snacks we want. Guys, we brought a cake on this trip. So that's one good thing to keep in mind about this trail, is that you can resupply. And the way that we did it, we started at Mowich Lake. And so when we came to the area the night before, Molly and I had been helping our family harvest in North Dakota. And then we did a quick drive where, of course, we stopped in Glacier National Park, went on one hike, and then drove Going to the Sun Road. And then we got to Washington the night before, or I guess we stayed in Idaho, and then we got to Washington. So the day before our trip started, we had told Rachel, she wasn't able to meet us until a certain time because she had an appointment. So we had told Rachel that we would resupply her for the last 2 days, which I'm like, that's kind of like a little bit scary to resupply someone that's not yourself, because you're like, I hope I only bring foods that they like. Even though she's our friend, I feel like I wanted her to really enjoy the foods we brought. So we dropped off our first resupply at White River, which was actually so awesome because we could pick up our permit at the same time and not have to worry about them the next day. And the really cool thing was, we thought we were going to have to drive all the way to White River Campground to drop it off, which I think is like an additional, 20 miles? We thought it was like 30 extra minutes on our drive or something. Like, and the ranger there, I don't know if they do this all the time at the Sunrise Ranger Station. She was like, oh yeah, we can just, if you drop off your bucket here, we actually just bring them down and leave them in a cache area for you guys. So that's something to keep in mind if you want to pick up cache at White River Campground. Maybe they don't do it all the time, but I think if they have a ranger headed that way, they'll take your bucket down there for you, which can cut down on some of the time that it takes, because it does take time to drive around the mountain and drop stuff off. Like if you're going 90 miles on foot, you're obviously going way more miles in your car. And so that takes a chunk of time.
And something to consider is you can also mail your resupplies, and you need to do that several weeks in advance before your hike. You can go to Mount Rainier's website, the national park website, and there's information on food caches, food storage while you're in the park, and then how to do your resupplies. So definitely check that out if you have a permit and you're planning to do the Wonderland Trail. So we dropped off our first bucket at sunrise. And I'll have to say that we lucked out with the seasonality of our trip, because Mount Rainier implemented a timed entry system. So that means if you're wanting to enter the park, you actually have to go online and purchase like an entry permit for certain time frames. And certain seasons. So I think that it had ended Labor Day weekend for us. And because we were starting our trip on, I don't even remember what day it was, like the 25th of September, there was no timed entry. So we could just drive into Sunrise. There was one car ahead of us at the Ranger entrance area. But just know, if you were starting your hike and you were going in peak months, like in July or August, you would maybe end up waiting in a long line and needing a timed entry. So something to consider.
And one other thing that I didn't think of at all until after our trip was over is we were very fortunate for the weekend that we chose, or the day that we chose to do this, because we wanted to be there for peak fall colors, which obviously you cannot predict in April. And so we were very thankful because we got to see a ton of fall colors on trail. And that was just, what a blessing, because that's not really something that you can actually plan. But we were so fortunate because the week that we were there, I feel like people weren't really being drawn in for fall colors yet. And I think if we had gone a week, like maybe a week and a half later, we would have probably been having to wait in those hours-long lines to enter the park, even without that permit, just because there can be so many people trying to enter to see the fall colors. So that's just something to keep in mind, is either there might be a time to entry, or just if you're doing it around like a peak fall color time, people might be trying to flock into the park to see the fall colors.
And so then going on with the resupplies, so we dropped off our sunrise area resupply that was going to be taken to the White River Campground by the rangers the day before we started our hike. And then the day of our hike, we actually then dropped a bucket of our resupply at Longmire's Wilderness Information Center before we then drove to Mowich Lake. So I did have to do some of my signature Google Maps, seeing how long it takes to get from point A to point B, and then adding those together and all the maths involved with that, so that we made sure that we actually left in the morning early enough so we'd have time to drop off our resupply and also hit the trail. So all things to consider, but we hands down absolutely loved having the resupplies. It made our lives much easier and very fun, because then we could bring kind of like luxury food items.
One thing that was kind of funny is we haven't had to do any math for resupplies since 2022, which I guess is not that long ago, but it's 2 years off of doing weird resupply math. And it was kind of funny because we had to try and figure out, you have to kind of divide it out, because you'll need breakfast for one of the mornings that you're going to pick up the resupply, but you don't need lunch and you don't need dinner. And but then for the next one, you'll need breakfast, but you won't need lunch, but you won't need dinner, and all that kind of weird stuff. And kind of doing the math for like on the first day, you don't need breakfast, and on the last day, you don't need dinner. And it was so funny because I honestly need to just make an Excel spreadsheet, because I have a way in my head that I know to do the math. But then Molly and I feel like we always start arguing about it, because we're like, well, wait, did you factor in the first or the last day? And then I'm like, did I factor in the first or the last day? Let me go back to my mind math. Was that right?
And really, like, our first resupply, we were going to pick it up in the morning. Our second resupply, we were going to pick it up in the afternoon. So then it's like factoring, like, which snacks do I want to bring and which ones do I want in the resupply bucket?
Yeah. And so then we have just this like crazy looking paper, which honestly, I'm going to see if I can find it. I'll take a picture of it and I'll post it. Every week we post the pictures and videos from what we talked about on Facebook or Instagram at Two Sisters on Adventures, so you can see our stuff there. But I'm going to post it because I feel like it actually would be helpful to someone, especially if you're doing a 8-day, 7-night trip and you're resupplying in similar areas to us, or just even seeing how I would do it. I made boxes that were each day.
I made boxes.
No, I made the boxes. Well, look, maybe we both made boxes, and then I think we only kept the correct paper. I wonder whose.
I think we each did it in our own unique way, and then we were still confused because once again we resupplied. Our first resupply was, I believe, on our 4th day on trail. So then that means we had 3 full days before we got to our resupply on the morning of the 4th. But our first day, we only did a half day. So it got very confusing. And in reality, it feels very stressful, because if you were to do your math wrong and then maybe you have to just not eat supper one night because it's in the bucket and you didn't do your math correct, then you would be upset with yourself.
Yeah. So that was kind of just a funny little additional thing. And then we stayed at an Airbnb the night before. FYI, if you ever stay in Packwood, there's this very cute little Airbnb. It used to be a motel, and it's redone. It's probably the cleanest, cutest place I've ever stayed. Nice. It was such a perfect first night stay, and it was half off because it's fall. That's another perk of the fall. Off season. But it was so funny because we showed up, and then Rachel was going to put her stuff, divvy her stuff out into her pack for the first day, and then her stuff for the resupply bucket. And she was trying to ask, how many dinners do I need to bring? And I was like, let me get out the sheets. And she was like, what is all of this? Because there was also
she gave her the wrong sheet. Instead of giving her our confusing diagram with boxes and numbers and calculations, Carrie actually gave her this other paper that had just all these numbers in lines, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 and 2, 3, 4, 5, 1.
And it's the way that we rearrange our trays when we're dehydrating. And she was like, what is this? Some kind of a Sudoku thing? And I was like, oh, that's actually not for you. We have a different confusing sheet of numbers to give you. So we sorted out all our food the night before and put it in the buckets. And then, of course, the next morning we dropped off our last bucket. But it was just one of those funny things that you forget about when you don't do resupplies. It's a resupply is a luxury and a curse because you have to know how to do weird math.
Totally. Another thing to consider if you're looking to enter the lottery to hike the Wonderland Trail is the seasonality of the trail. So I'm trying to remember if so basically thinking about the Pacific Northwest and snowfall and how long that snow actually sticks around at higher elevations, I don't think it would be a common occurrence for someone to do a Wonderland Trail hike in June. Would you say?
I don't think so.
I think basically probably the middle to end of July is when a person would reasonably expect to start. And so some considerations for July would be that you would be dealing with high elevation snow. I think that the section from Indian Bar to Summerland Camp, which is like 3 or 4 miles, is pretty consistently snow covered through the end of July and sometimes into August.
Also, they put up a lot of bridges that they take down in the spring and fall. So a consideration for both spring here meaning July, mountain spring, alpine
Pacific Northwest spring, and in the mountains.
Yeah. So a consideration for both early July and late September / early October is they start taking some of those bridges out. So you may have more wet crossings, and also the rivers and creeks would be running higher. So that's a consideration as well for the July people.
Another thing to consider in July in the Pacific Northwest is when the snow is melting, then shortly after that, the mosquitoes come. So you're going to be dealing with more bugs, including mosquitoes and flies. I would say August is probably a pretty desirable month to do a backpacking trip like the Wonderland Trail, because you're going to have, weather extremes can always happen on a mountain. You can get snow any of the 12 months on Mount Rainier. But August is going to be a pretty temperate month for you typically. That's when we would do a lot of our backpacking trips. You also have a lot of daylight to work with because you're in the middle of summer and you're in the northern part of the US. So you have a lot of daylight.
There's also a lot of like wildflowers and that kind of stuff that's just really pretty to enjoy. And then all the amenities should be in place, right? They have bear poles at each campsite, which basically means you do not have to carry a bear canister there. You just have to carry your food in a bag, and then you put it up on the bear pole every night. And so that's another nice thing is like, in August, you're for sure going to have all those bear poles up. They take them down for the winter, right? So I think they started taking them down the day after our trip was done, which was very fortunate for us because we did not bring a bear canister because we knew that we could use a bear bag, and I hadn't even considered that they might take down the bear pole. So that's something that you also might not have access to in July. But it might be less competitive in July too. So it just kind of depends on what kind of things you want to deal with, because August can be very hot sometimes, or August can be very cloudy and rainy sometimes. So it's like probably that would be the prime month to do it. But for us, I feel like October actually was the prime month to do it. Yeah. And September is kind of a month where it can be very nice, or it can be super cloudy. It can be, randomly really hot or kind of cold. Wow. There can be a lot of smoke, or, there can be a lot of rain. It's just one of those months where it's kind of like you just kind of are doing something a little risky, not risky in terms of danger, but risky in terms of having like the perfect, beautiful trip, which on any through hike, there's going to be days that are less good weather or better weather. But I feel like you gamble a little more with, you might have worse weather or conditions.
And so something I'd think about for September is it's going to be colder. Once again, you're going to be, usually you typically would expect colder weather, including colder temperatures at night, colder lows. And then just that kind of, you're moving towards a season where rain may come at some point, and you're going to have to deal with that.
Probably a couple benefits though would be a little bit less crowded, in September, especially those popular day hiking areas. I would say there was a person who asked, we asked for, people to put their questions on our Instagram, and we were happy to answer them. And you can still go there and ask questions actually, because we're still recording this series, but by the time this drops. But anyway, someone asked, was it really crowded during the time that we hiked it? And I would say no. I would say it was relatively very peaceful compared to other hiking that I've done in Mount Rainier. There was probably one day, and it was a Saturday, and we were hiking near the road basically. And so we saw quite a few people the closer we got to the road. But that day was an 18-mile day, and I would say that probably 6 out of the 18 miles were times where we'd consistently see people, but we were never hiking in a conga line. Yeah. And so I would say that's something that's very cool about this trail, at least at the end of September, early October. I don't know about the other months of the year, but the time period when we went, it was not a holiday weekend, right? It wasn't Labor Day. It was just, kind of trending towards off season. And I think that was part of what made it feel so fun was that it had the amenities of a very popular trail, but not the traffic of it, which was really cool.
Yeah, and so then that brings us basically to our time frame where we hiked the trail, which is the end of September / early October. So considerations for that time frame is it definitely is moving towards colder weather. There's the possibility of significant snowfall. There's the possibility of significant rain. And then something that's interesting is they start to even close roads. So by middle of October, I believe that the road to Mowich Lake gets closed. I think this year it is now finally closed. I think it was like the 16th of October that they closed it, 2024. And then even the road that goes like through Box Canyon and such gets closed as well. So those access points start to shrink, and then they take down the bear poles. They start pulling bridges and things like that, foot logs. And so there's really, because you're dealing with the outdoors, you can't guarantee yourself like a perfect 8 days of a weather window. And so we had to just be very okay with that late in the season, saying that if there's a forecast that is basically like continuous rain, we don't want to do the trail. Like, we're not interested in being in the rain for 8 days. We decided, if there's significant chance of snowfall in the forecast, we're not going to do the trail either. And then we just had to be okay with that. So when we bought the permit, basically we were giving ourselves that chance, but we were really not even allowing ourselves to get too excited until we were within like 1 to 2 weeks of the trip, because there's such that variability. So in the end, like, the main negative I would say with the time of year we went is that I think we had sunrise at 7 a.m. and sunset at 7 p.m., which 12 hours of daylight is actually really great. However, Carrie and I, if you listen to our podcast, you know this, we love to get a later start from camp and then just take advantage of daylight. It's like we've had times in Washington in July where we're rolling into camp at like 9 p.m. right before the sun is going to set. And you just can't really expect to do that when you're later in the fall. But in reality, it was still a good amount of daylight, just not if you compare it to July. So I actually don't think I would have wanted to do this trip at a different time of year. We didn't deal with any bugs at all.
Minus spiders, but you'll hear about that later. Lots of spiders.
We didn't deal with mosquitoes or flies. We had clear skies. There was no smoke at all the entire time we hiked. And honestly, Carrie and I would both agree some of our prime hiking temperatures are basically 45 to 55 degrees. Like, that is so comfortable if the sun is out and you're moving. So I can't believe how well it worked out. And we were just really happy with the time that we went.
And I think that there's always variables for things, right? Because like after our trip, I would just be like, everyone should only ever go in September, like late September, early October is the best time ever to go. But obviously you just have to understand these variables and accept them. And I mean, we brought rain jackets, we brought warm clothing, we brought changes of clothing for in case stuff got wet. We brought waterproof stuff sacks for sleeping bags and our clothes. Like, we also were prepared for it to be late September, early October weather. And it's like, you can't get mad at the mountain for behaving in the way that it behaves every single year at that time. So if you can accept those things and accept there being a little bit of uncertainty, then I would say that is the best time ever to go.
Carrie, if you were someone who wasn't accustomed to hiking in the Pacific Northwest, or maybe this was your first longer backpacking trip, do you feel like a trip in the shoulder season is still okay, or do you feel like you'd want to have like some other trips under your belt before venturing into like those months where it's kind of more of a transition?
I think that I would probably want to have a couple at least shorter trips under my belt, because there's so many things that I don't think you think of until you start hiking. And so then to transition to going on a longer trip in the shoulder season, I think would be really challenging, because I mean, we didn't have rain pants before we had to for our mountaineering course. But I feel like, that's actually a good safety item to have, although they don't prevent all rain from soaking through, as you'll find out later. But I think that probably either you should have a couple short trips under your belt before you take on anything shoulder season, or maybe have some like fall hiking experience. Yeah, I think that's a fair question, because I guess I wouldn't want to encourage people like your first ever hiking trip should be the Wonderland Trail at the end of September, because I guess, but also some people just kind of learn through doing things. So
I wasn't really sure of the answer myself. That's why I wanted to know. And I think if anything, what we're doing when we make our podcast series is we're wanting to tell interesting stories from our trip. We're trying to bring some laughs and joy and also provide some inspiration and just information that are helpful for listeners to plan their own trips. So that was just something where I was just trying to think through, like, I want to empower people to do what they put their mind to, but at the same time, the time frame of when we went, I felt like it was pushing the boundaries of my comfort level for a longer trip. And so I was just curious what you thought.
Well, and honestly, I think it depends on what kind of a type of a person you are too. Because if you're the type of a person who is going to sit down and try to like read a lot about, things that you might need for the shoulder season, and you're willing to research and all that kind of stuff, I mean, maybe it would be okay. But I feel like you should definitely, especially if you're going on the shoulder season, have a few backpacking trips under your belt. You don't necessarily have to have a super long one under your belt. But yeah, I mean, shoulder season has different considerations. And the nice thing about this trail is honestly, there's so many bailout points, which was another reason we felt comfortable going this late in the season. It was because like if for some reason the weather was going to get really bad, my mom could have sent me a message on our inReach and we probably could have hitchhiked or something. So we felt like there was it was very different from like going into, let's say, like the winds in Wyoming, where it's very remote and it's like you can go days without seeing, even a trailhead that's 10 miles from a road. So I think that it was kind of like we made a lot of decisions as to why that was a good option, including the Tahoe Rim Trail, right? I don't know. There's a lot of places I probably wouldn't hike in late September or early October, but the Wonderland Trail felt like a place where I had enough safety rationale that I could go ahead and do it.
And it's funny because we invited Rachel to this trip, but when we invited her, we were kind of just like, okay, and just so you know, like, because it's late in the season, we're not guaranteed perfect conditions, and if it looks really bad, we're just like not gonna do it, but we really want to. And so it's funny because we just like didn't even have any hype about the trip until Rachel sent us a text, I feel like probably 7 days before the trip, and she was like, so what are you guys thinking? And we had been looking at extended forecasts and it looked really positive, and then we finally were like, oh my gosh, it's happening.
I think we're doing it.
So yeah, there are so many trips that I've been on that I think back on fondly and just love, and this is a trip that goes right in there. Like, it was incredible, and we can't wait for you guys to join us on the journey.
Thank you so much for listening to another episode of the
Two Sisters on Adventures podcast.
If you like what you heard today and if you feel like it was helpful for you, we'd appreciate if you'd share it with a friend, or if you could leave us a rating or review on the platform of your choice. You can also follow us, as I mentioned, on Facebook or Instagram at Two Sisters on Adventures so that you can see pictures and videos from the things that we talked about. We hope that you guys are ready to come on this trip with us because we're so excited to bring you.
And as people who have been thinking about and planning for the Wonderland Trail for 4 years, hopefully we'll have the ability to naturally answer a lot of questions that you have. But once again, if you do have specific questions on the trail that you want to ask us, don't hesitate to send us a message and we'll try to answer those through our episodes.
Thanks so much, guys.
Bye.